What if a mistake that wasn't yours condemned you forever? After years of just trying to survive, a man watches his life fall apart as everyone believes the lie created about him. But everything changes when a child comes forward with proof that reveals who really destroyed so many lives. Now he must decide whether to run once more or confront the system that branded him as guilty. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The rain fell mercilessly on the streets of Astoria, Queens, on that Thursday night that seemed to have no end. The puddles reflected the faint lights of the old lampposts, and the smell of wet asphalt mingled with the aroma of fried food escaping through the fogged-up windows of the Star of the East diner. It was one of those establishments that had seen better days, with scratched formica tables, mismatched chairs, and a laminated menu that promised honest food for fair prices. Celia, the owner, a woman in her early 50s with her hair in a tight bun and eyes tired from watching life go by, wiped the counter with automatic movements, hoping the night would end soon so she could lock the door and go home. In the darkest corner of the room, far from the few tables occupied by night workers and ride-share drivers seeking a hot coffee, sat a man who seemed not to belong there. Karim Habibi was 25, but he seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime on his slumped shoulders. The suit he wore had once been expensive. You could still tell by the cut and the fabric, but now it was wrinkled, with stains that no dry cleaner could ever remove. His dark, deep-set eyes stared at the cup of cold coffee in front of him without really seeing it. His black hair, once always well cut and combed, fell unkempt over his forehead, giving him the air of someone who had given up on keeping up appearances long ago. 3 years ago, that same face had graced the covers of business magazines. Karim Habibi, the American, prodigy of Lebanese descent, the young manager who had transformed his family's inheritance into one of the most admired investment funds in North America. The son of immigrants who had arrived in the United States decades ago and built a small empire in the textile trade, Karim had been the first in his family to study economics, to enter the sophisticated world of international finance. At 22, he was already managing millions. At 23, his fund, Habibi Capital, was on the list of the country's most promising. Investors from all over the world wanted to put their money in the hands of this brilliant young man who seemed to have a gift for turning numbers into fortunes. Then came the fall, swift, brutal, incomprehensible. In a single week in March, 3 years ago, Habibi Capital had collapsed. The protection algorithms, the very ones Karim swore were infallible, had failed spectacularly. The losses were catastrophic. Entire retirement funds evaporated. Families lost their life savings. Small business owners who had entrusted their reserves to the fund saw it all disappear in a matter of days. The headlines that once celebrated the financial genius now crucified him as the villain who had destroyed thousands of lives. Karim still remembered the feeling of being at the center of a hurricane, the furious calls, the lawsuits, the threats, the former clients waiting at his office door demanding answers he didn't have. And worse than all that was watching Camilla, his wife, the woman who had believed in him from the beginning, gradually wither under the weight of shame and stress. She had held on for the first few weeks, tried to defend him, stayed by his side when everyone else had walked away. But the pressure was too much. The sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the depression that took hold of her like a shadow. 6 months after the collapse, Camilla was gone. The death certificate cited cardiac complications, but Karim knew the truth. She had died of grief, of shame, of a broken heart that could no longer bear it. He had spent the following months in a fog. The lawsuits continued, the hearings multiplied, the lawyers spoke in technical terms he could barely follow. In the end, they couldn't prove he had acted in bad faith, but they couldn't completely exonerate him either. Officially, the collapse was the result of failures in risk, management, and reckless decisions. Karim Habibi, the financial prodigy, was transformed into a symbol of everything that can go wrong when you trust too much in automated systems and arrogant young men who think they've mastered the market. His license to operate in the financial market was revoked, his assets frozen to pay damages. His family, ashamed, distanced themselves. His friends disappeared. All that was left was him, a 12-square-meter rented room in Queens, a wrinkled suit, and the guilt that suffocated him every morning when he opened his eyes and remembered that he was alive while Camilla was not. It was on one of those hopeless nights that he ended up at the Star of the East diner. Not because the food was good or the place was welcoming, but simply because it was the only establishment open at that hour of the night, and because being alone in his tiny room was worse than being alone in an empty diner. Celia had let him in even knowing he barely had enough money for a coffee. She had even placed a leftover bread roll in front of him from the day without charging him. She understood broken people. She saw it every day. The rain was still falling outside when the diner door opened with a creak. Celia looked up, ready to send away any beggar or drunk who wanted to shelter from the storm without paying. But the person who entered was a girl. A child who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, soaked from head to toe, wearing a frayed dress that had once been blue but was now an indefinite color, her feet bare and dirty, her brown hair stuck to her wet face. In her arms, clutched against her chest as if it were the most valuable thing in the world, she carried an old notebook with a plastic cover torn at the edges. Celia felt her heart ache, as it always did when she saw children in that situation, but she also felt the practical hardness of someone who knows she can't save everyone. The diner was already operating at a loss, she could barely pay the bills, and if she started giving shelter to every street kid who came through the door, she'd soon have a crowd camped inside. The girl said nothing. She just stood at the entrance, dripping water onto the cracked ceramic floor, with those enormous green eyes fixed on Celia. It wasn't a look of pleading. It was a firm, almost defiant look, as if to say, I have as much right to be here as anyone else. Celia sighed. She grabbed an old dish towel and went to the girl. She wasn't going to let her stay, but at least she would dry that little face before sending her away. The girl didn't back away. She took the towel, quickly wiped her face, handed it back, and remained there standing. Celia noticed she was trembling, not just from the cold, but from exhaustion. Something was wrong with this child. It wasn't just that she was on the street in the middle of the night, soaked and barefoot. It was something deeper. An ancient sadness in her eyes, a maturity that shouldn't be there. You need to go, little girl. I can't let you stay here, Celia said, trying to sound firm, but feeling her voice tremble slightly. The girl shook her head slowly. Just a few minutes. Just until the rain passes, please. Celia looked at the storm outside. The rain showed no intention of stopping any time soon. She looked back at the child and saw that, despite the cold and fatigue, there was a strength in that girl that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't a physical strength. It was something in her eyes, in the way she held that old notebook as if it contained the secrets of the universe. All right, you can stay until the rain passes, but stay quiet in that corner. I don't want any trouble, Celia said, knowing she was breaking her own rules, but unable to send that child back into the storm. The girl nodded and began to walk toward the back of the diner. She passed the empty tables, the workers who barely looked up from their meals, and went straight to the dark corner where Karim was sitting. She didn't hesitate. She simply pulled up a chair and sat down in front of him, placing the wet notebook on the table between the cup of cold coffee and a plate with breadcrumbs. Karim slowly raised his eyes. It took him a few seconds to really process what he was seeing. A soaked child sitting in front of him, looking at him with an intensity that didn't match her age. He wanted to send her away, to say he wanted to be alone, but the words wouldn't come out. There was something in her gaze that held him captive. Go away, he finally managed to say, but his voice came out weak, without conviction. No, the girl replied with disconcerting simplicity. You need to see this. She placed her hand on the wet notebook. Karim looked at the notebook and then back at the girl. He didn't have the energy for this. He didn't have the energy for anything. He just wanted everyone to leave him alone, for the world to stop existing for a few hours. But the girl didn't move. She remained there, waiting. I don't need to see anything. I just want... Karim started to say, but stopped. What did he want? To die? To disappear? To feel nothing anymore? None of those options seemed appropriate to say out loud, especially to a child. You're Karim Habibi. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. The girl knew who he was. Karim felt a chill run down his spine. "I was," he replied. "Now I'm nobody." The girl shook her head. "You were accused of stealing people's money, of breaking the fund, of destroying families." She spoke with a clinical coldness, as if reciting facts from a history book. "My mother invested everything she had in your fund. Everything. Every last cent." Karim closed his eyes. Another one. Another family destroyed because of him. Another life he had ruined. "I'm sorry," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to himself. "I'm so sorry for everything." "You don't have to be," the girl said, "because it wasn't your fault." Karim's eyes snapped open. He stared at the girl as if she had said the most absurd thing in the world. "Of course it was my fault. I was the manager. I was responsible. It all happened on my watch." The girl pushed the notebook toward him. "Open it," she ordered. Karim looked at the notebook. It was wet, the pages swollen, the cover torn. It looked like it had been through a lot. He didn't want to open it. He didn't want to see more numbers, more charts, more evidence of his failure. But there was something in the girl's eyes that made it impossible to refuse. With trembling hands, he opened the notebook. The first page was covered in numbers, equations, hand-drawn graphs, complex calculations done with impressive precision. Karim immediately recognized what he was seeing. They were analyses of Habibi Capital's algorithm, the same formulas he had used to calculate risks, to set limits, to protect the investments. But there was something strange. There were notes in the margins, markings in red, circles around specific numbers. Someone had reviewed all of this and had found something. Karim turned the page. More numbers, more charts, more notes. And then he saw something that made his heart stop for a second. A side-by-side comparison. On one side, the parameters he had set for the algorithm. On the other, the parameters that were actually running in the system when the collapse happened. They were different. Completely different. The safety locks had been inverted. The risk limits had been multiplied. The system that was supposed to protect had been turned into a machine of destruction. He looked up at the girl, feeling for the first time in 3 years something other than guilt and despair. He felt confusion, disbelief, and a tiny spark of something that might be hope. "Where did you get this?" "From my mother," the girl replied. "She was an accountant. She worked with numbers all day. She invested everything in your fund because she believed in you. She thought you were honest. After everything fell apart, she was desperate. She lost everything. We were left with nothing. But she couldn't accept it. She was good with numbers, very good. And something didn't add up. She started investigating. She got copies of reports, documents, records, and she found this." Karim stared at the pages of the notebook as if he were seeing ghosts. "This can't be true," he whispered. "If the parameters were changed, if someone tampered with the system, I would have noticed. The auditors would have noticed." "You trusted your partner," the girl said. "Maurice Taylor. He had full access to the system. He could change whatever he wanted. And he did. He turned everything upside down, turned your protections into traps, and while everything was collapsing, he siphoned off the money." Karim felt the room spin. Maurice, his friend from college, the man who had been his partner from the beginning, the man who had cried on his shoulder when Camilla died, the man who, after the collapse, had managed to quickly distance himself from the fund, claiming he was just a minority partner with no access to operational decisions. The man who now, 3 years later, owned a successful investment management firm, lived in a luxury apartment on the Upper East Side, and was seen at high society events in New York. "That's impossible," Karim said, but he was no longer sure. "Maurice he was my friend." The girl showed no emotion. "Your mother found out that about $400 million went missing. They weren't lost in the market. They were diverted to shell accounts, to tax havens. While everyone was looking at you as the culprit, he was moving the money out of the country. My mother found out, and my mother died." The last sentence was delivered with a coldness that made Karim shudder. He looked at that 8-year-old girl and saw in her a pain he knew well, the pain of losing someone, the the pain of carrying a truth no one wants to hear. "What happened to your mother?" Karim asked, though he already suspected the answer. "She found out too much. She went after records, documents, started asking questions, and then, one night she just didn't wake up. They said it was suicide, said she was depressed about losing everything. But my mother wouldn't kill herself, not before proving you were innocent, not before showing everyone who the real thief was." Karim felt tears burn in his eyes for the first time in months. They weren't tears of despair. They were tears of rage, of a fury that had been dormant for a long time and was now beginning to awaken. If this is true, if Maurice really did what you're saying, then he didn't just steal hundreds of millions, he destroyed thousands of families. He killed Camilla, he killed your mother, and he let me take the blame for everything. "Yes," the girl said, "and now you're going to do something about it." Karim looked at her, at that soaked, barefoot child, holding a notebook that could change everything. "I don't know if I can," he said honestly. "I'm nothing anymore. No one will listen to me. No one will believe me." The girl reached out her small hand and touched Karim's on the table. It was cold and trembling, but there was strength in that touch. "My mother believed in you when everyone said you were a thief. I believe in you now. Sometimes that's enough to start." Celia, who had been watching the whole scene from a distance without understanding what was happening, approached the table. She saw the open notebook, the numbers, the tears in the eyes of the man who had been frequenting her diner for weeks. She saw the soaked girl, her hand on his, and she made a decision that would change everything. "You too," she said in that rough voice of someone who smokes too much but has a heart bigger than the world. "Come with me. I have a small room in the back. It's not much, but it's dry and has a bed. You'll sleep there tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do." Karim looked at Celia, not understanding. "I can't accept that. I'm not asking for your opinion," Celia interrupted. "I'm offering a roof. Do you accept or not? The girl is staying either way, but you can stay too if you want." Karim looked at the girl. She was staring at him with those enormous green eyes, waiting for him to make the most important decision of his life. To stay or to leave, to fight or to give up, to believe there was still a chance or to accept that he was just the villain of the story. He took a deep breath. He looked at the wet notebook on the table. He looked at the girl's hands, small and dirty but firm. And then, for the first time in 3 years, he made a decision that had nothing to do with giving up. "I'll stay," he said, "and we're going to find out the truth, all of us." The girl smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it was there, as if she had always known he would make the right choice, as if she had bet everything on him from the moment she walked into that diner, drenched by the rain. Celia shook her head, half in disbelief at what she was doing, but also feeling that something bigger was happening there, something worth taking a risk for. "Then let's go. The room is small, but there are blankets, and tomorrow we'll start thinking this through properly." They stood up. Karim carefully picked up the notebook from the table as if it were a sacred relic. The girl walked beside him, unhurried. Celia led them through the back of the diner, down a narrow hallway that smelled of cooking oil and spices, to an old wooden door. She opened it to reveal a tiny room with a single bed, an old wardrobe, and a small window through which you could still hear the sound of the rain. "You can use it," Celia said. "We'll talk more tomorrow. Now get some sleep." She left and closed the door, leaving Karim and the girl alone in the cramped space. Karim looked at the bed and then at the girl. "You can have the bed. I'll sleep on the floor." The girl shook her head. "The bed is big enough and it's cold. It's better to share." Karim hesitated, but there was a practical logic to what she said. He lay down on the edge of the bed, his back to her, holding the notebook against his chest. The girl lay down on the other side, curled up in the thin blanket, and closed her eyes. For a long time, they were silent. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside the room, too, human Rex tried to find some warmth, some comfort, some reason to believe that tomorrow could be different. "What's your name?" Karim asked in the darkness. "Laura," the girl replied. "My name is Laura." Laura, Karim repeated. Thank you for not giving up on me, Laura. Thank you for not giving up on yourself, she replied. And that night, in a tiny room in the back of a run-down diner, something began that would change everything. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't magic. It was just a stubborn child, a broken man, and a notebook full of numbers that didn't lie. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's all you need to start turning the tables. The first rays of sun pierced the small window of the room in the back of the Star of the East diner, waking Karim with a strange sensation. It took him a few seconds to remember where he was and why someone else was sleeping in the same bed. Laura was curled up under the blanket, her brown hair spread across the old pillow. Her face finally relaxed after so long, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her mother's notebook was on the floor beside the bed, protected by a plastic bag Celia had brought during the night. Karim got up slowly, trying not to wake her. It had been a long time since he had slept in a bed that wasn't his, a long time since he had slept next to another person. Since Camilla was gone, he had avoided any kind of closeness, any reminder that he once had someone by his side. But there was something different about this situation. Laura wasn't Camilla. It wasn't romance. It wasn't romantic affection. It was something else, a strange and unexpected connection between two people who had been destroyed by the same man. He picked up the notebook from the floor and went to the window. The rain had stopped during the night, and now New York City was waking up under a gray but dry sky. The streets of Astoria were already beginning to fill with people, delivery trucks, merchants opening their shops. Life went on, indifferent to anyone's personal dramas. Karim opened the notebook again, now more calmly, with natural light. He studied each page, each note, each calculation Laura's mother had made. And the more he read, the more convinced he became that this was not the fantasy of a desperate person. It was real. It was meticulous. It was proof that he had been betrayed in the most vile way possible. "Do you understand what's written in there?" Laura's voice startled him. She had woken up and was now sitting on the bed watching him with those attentive green eyes. Karim nodded. "I understand. Your mother was very good with numbers. She found patterns that the auditors didn't see, or didn't want to see." "She was the best," Laura said with pride in her voice, "before everything fell apart. She worked for a big company, made good money, we had a nice house, I went to a private school. She always said that numbers don't lie, that if you know how to read the numbers right, they tell the whole story." "And what happened after the fund collapsed?" Laura got out of bed and went to the window too, standing beside Karim. "We lost everything. The house, the car, the savings. My mum got depressed, but she never stopped working with the numbers. She spent months gathering documents, doing calculations, trying to understand where the money had gone. I'd see her awake in the middle of the night, filling that notebook, checking and rechecking every account. She said she was going to prove your innocence, that she was going to show everyone you weren't the villain." Karim felt a lump in his throat. "Why would she do that? She didn't even know me." "Because she believed in justice," Laura answered simply. "And because she had seen your interview, the one you gave right after the collapse, when you were still trying to explain yourself. She said she saw in your eyes that you were lost, that you didn't understand. What had happened? She said guilty people aren't confused, they know exactly what they did." Karim remembered that interview. It had been a disaster. He could barely form coherent sentences, still in shock, trying to understand how everything had crumbled so quickly. The journalists had interpreted his confusion as a pathetic attempt to feign innocence. But Laura's mother had seen something else. Celia knocked on the door and entered without waiting for a response, carrying a tray with coffee, buttered toast, and fruit. "You need to eat," she said, placing the tray on the old wardrobe. "And then we need to talk about what we're going to do." They ate in silence. The coffee was strong and hot, the toast was fresh, the fruit was simple but tasty. Karim couldn't remember the last time he'd had a real breakfast. For the past few months he had barely eaten, surviving on old coffee and leftover food he found on sale at the market. Celia pulled up an old chair and sat in front of them. "I'll be direct. I don't understand anything about finance, investment funds, that stuff. But I understand people, and I look at you two and I see one thing clearly. You have a story to tell. A story that needs to be heard." No one will listen to us, Karim said. I'm the most hated man on Wall Street. Anything I say will be seen as an attempt to get myself off the hook. Then you can't be the only one talking, Celia replied. You need other people, people who can confirm your story, people who have access to information you don't. Laura looked at Celia with admiration. You're talking about my uncle. Karim frowned. You have an uncle? Laura nodded. Rick, my mum's brother. He works with computers, with servers, that technical stuff. After my mum died, he tried to take me in, but he couldn't get custody. They said he didn't have the means, that he lived alone, worked too much. I ended up in foster care. He visits when he can, but it's hard. And what does he have to do with this? Karim asked. He works at Data Cloud America, Laura said, the company that hosted Habibi Capital's servers. He has access to the backups, to the old records. If someone tampered with the systems, he can find the technical evidence. Karim felt his heart race. This was more than he could have hoped for. If there were really technical records proving that the algorithm's parameters had been altered, if they could show when and by whom it was done, they would have not just accounting evidence, but digital evidence as well. It would be much harder to dismiss. But will he risk his job for this? Karim asked. Messing with confidential client data, even for companies that no longer exist, could get him into serious trouble. He feels guilty, Laura said softly. When my mom started investigating, she asked him for help. He thought it was paranoia, that she was obsessed, that she needed to move on. He told her she was seeing things that weren't there. A few weeks later, my mom was dead. He lives with the guilt of not taking her seriously. Celia stood up. Then we'll go to him. Today, you'll talk to him, show him this notebook, convince him to help. If he works with servers and has access to the data, he's our best chance. Karim looked at Laura. Do you know where to find him? He works at the Data Cloud America office in Midtown South, Laura said. I know the address. My mum used to take me there sometimes when I was little. 2 hours later, Karim and Laura were in front of an office building in Midtown South. The building wasn't luxurious, but it was well maintained, with a clean lobby and polite security guards. Laura gave her uncle's name, and after a few minutes of waiting, a man of about 35 came down to meet them. Rick was thin, wore thin-rimmed glasses, had messy brown hair, and an expression of permanent exhaustion. When he saw Laura, his face lit up for a moment, but then he became confused upon seeing Karim beside her. Laura, what are you doing here? Rick knelt down to the girl's level. Why aren't you at the group home? Who is this man? Uncle Rick, this is Karim Habibi, Laura said matter-of-factly, as if introducing a man accused of destroying thousands of lives was the most normal thing in the world. Rick froze. He turned pale. He stood up slowly and looked at Karim with a mixture of shock and anger. You? What are you doing with my niece? How did you find her? It's not like that, Karim said quickly. She found me. She has your sister's notebook, the notes Frances made before she died. Hearing his sister's name, Rick looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. He looked at Laura, who was clutching the notebook to her chest. That notebook, he whispered. I thought it was lost. I thought the social workers had thrown it out with the rest of your mum's things. I hid it, Laura said. I knew it was important. My mum spent months working on it. I wasn't going to let it disappear. Rick ran a hand over his face. We can't talk. Here, let's go to a coffee shop. I need to understand what's going on. They went to a small coffee shop on the corner, sat at a table in the back, away from prying eyes. Laura placed the notebook on the table. Rick opened it with trembling hands, flipping through the pages as if he were seeing his sister's ghost. Tears began to roll down his face without him trying to hide them. She tried to show me this, he said, his voice choked with emotion. She tried to explain what she'd found, and I didn't pay attention. I told her she was seeing conspiracies where there were none. I told her she needed to accept that sometimes things just go wrong, that not everything is fraud. I sent her away. I told her she was obsessed. You couldn't have known, Karim said gently. I didn't know either. I was the manager of the fund and I didn't realize I was being sabotaged. Rick wiped his tears and looked at Karim. Why should I believe you? You're the man who destroyed my sister's life, who indirectly caused her death. Because numbers don't lie, Laura interrupted, repeating her mother's words. Uncle, you work with servers. You know that systems leave traces. Every change, every modification, every data entry and exit is logged somewhere. If someone messed with the parameters of the Habibi Capital Fund's algorithm, there's a record of it somewhere. Rick looked at his niece with a mixture of pride and sadness. You're just like her. Same stubbornness, same faith in numbers. Can you help us? Laura asked. Can you retrieve the server logs, the backups from when the fund still existed? Rick sighed deeply. Technically, yes, I have access to the historical archives. When a client company closes or cancels its contract, the data is archived for 5 years before being permanently deleted. Habibi Capital closed 3 years ago, so the data should still be there. But accessing it without authorization is serious. I could lose my job. I could even face legal action. My mother died trying to prove the truth, Laura said with that coldness that didn't suit her age. You wouldn't listen to her when she was alive. Are you going to listen now that she's gone? The blow was low, but effective. Rick closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them, again there was a determination that hadn't been there before. All right, I'll do it. For Francis and for you, Laura. But it will take time. I need to access the systems after business hours when there are fewer people monitoring, and I'll need a few days to comb through the data. We have time, Karim said. We're not going anywhere. Rick looked at him. If I find what you're looking for, if there really is evidence of sabotage, what are you going to do with it? We're going after justice, Karim replied. We're going to expose who really destroyed that fund. We're going to clear my name, and we're going to make the real culprit pay for what he did. Rick nodded slowly. Maurice Taylor, he said the name as if spitting poison. Francis mentioned him several times in the last few weeks before she died, said he was the key player in everything, that he had privileged access to the systems, that he had motive and opportunity. Karim felt the anger return. Maurice had been his friend, his partner, the man he trusted completely. To think that all of this had been planned, that Maurice had deliberately destroyed the fund, siphoned off hundreds of millions, let Karim take the fall, and had still managed to build an empire on the ruins, was almost unbelievable. Almost. Because now, with Francis's notebook in front of him and Rick agreeing to help, it was starting to make sense. If you were in Rick's shoes, would you have agreed to risk everything to help prove the truth? Or would you have chosen the security of your job? Tell us in the comments. The following days were filled with tension and waiting. Karim and Laura continued to live in the small room at the back of the diner. Celia didn't charge them anything, but Karim insisted on helping in the kitchen, washing dishes, cleaning tables, doing what he could to repay her generosity. Laura helped too, taking orders, bringing food to tables, chatting with the regular customers who quickly grew fond of the girl who was too serious for her age. During the day, while they worked at the diner, Karim studied Francis's notebook line by line. He borrowed paper and a pen from Celia and transcribed the most important information, organized it chronologically and created a timeline of what had happened. The more he studied, the clearer the pattern became. The changes to the algorithm's parameters had happened gradually, over months, small changes that individually might have seemed like normal adjustments, but together formed a systematic sabotage. And they had all occurred at times when Karim was traveling, at international conferences, in meetings with foreign investors, times when Morris was alone in the office with full access to the systems. At night, after the diner closed, Laura would sit beside Karim at the kitchen table and they would talk. Not always about the case, about numbers and investigations, sometimes about normal things. Karim told stories of his childhood, of when his grandparents arrived from Lebanon and opened the first fabric store in the garment district, of how his father worked 16 hours a day to give his children an education. Laura told him about her mother, about how they used to cook together on Sundays, about the movies they watched, about how Francis always said Laura was special, that she had a gift with numbers. "Do you miss her?" Karim asked one night, knowing it was a stupid question, but needing to ask it anyway. "Every day," Laura replied, "but you know what I miss the most? Believing that things will work out, My mom always said that if you work hard, if you're honest, if you do the right thing, in the end, everything will be okay. But she worked hard, she was honest, she did the right thing, and she still died alone with no one believing her. Karim felt a tightness in his chest. I used to believe that too, that hard work was rewarded, that being honest mattered, that doing the right thing was enough. And then everything collapsed, and I realized the world doesn't work that way. Laura looked at him. But we're going to make it work this time, aren't we? Karim had no answer for that. He didn't know if they would succeed. He didn't know if anyone would believe them, but he looked at that 8-year-old girl who had lost everything and still had the courage to believe in justice, and he felt he had to try. If only for her. On Friday night, a week after their first meeting, Rick showed up at the diner after midnight. He was pale, with deep dark circles under his eyes, but he held a flash drive in his hand. Celia locked the diner door, turned the sign to closed, and they all sat around a table in the back. Rick placed the flash drive on the table as if it were a bomb. I found it, he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. I spent the whole week digging through backups, system logs, access records, and I found everything. Karim felt his heart pound. What exactly? Rick opened the laptop he had brought and started showing them files. Code change logs, records of when the algorithm's parameters were modified, and best of all, the credentials of the person who made the changes. Maurice Taylor. He used his own administrator account to enter the system at specific times, always when you were out of the country, and he modified the risk parameters. He increased exposure, removed the safety locks, reversed the limits. He made it all look like normal optimization adjustments, but he was actually creating a time bomb. Laura stood up and looked at the computer screen, even without fully understanding what she was seeing. And the money, she asked. My mum talked about $400 million being diverted. Rick switched to another folder. I found that too. Transaction records that were routed through intermediary accounts, transfers to tax havens, shell companies. I couldn't trace everything, but I got enough to show the pattern. While the fund was collapsing, while thousands of people were losing their savings, Maurice was systematically moving money out, to places where no one could reach it. Karim looked at those files as if he were seeing a miracle. It was exactly what they needed. Technical evidence, dates, times, records that couldn't be easily dismissed as conspiracy theories or coincidences. Is this enough? Karim asked. Enough to prove I was sabotaged? Rick hesitated. It's enough to raise serious doubts, to demand a new investigation, but on its own it might not be enough. We need more. We need someone from inside the fund structure who can confirm there were irregularities, someone who saw strange things but was afraid to speak up. Celia, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. Marcia. Everyone looked at her. Karim frowned. Marcia who? Marcia Costello, Celia explained. She comes in here sometimes, works as an office manager at a clinic now, but before that, she worked at Habibi Capital. She was in charge of compliance. If I remember correctly, she always seemed like a tormented woman. Once a few months ago, she had too much to drink and started talking about how she felt guilty for not doing anything, for staying quiet when she knew something was wrong. Karim remembered Marcia, a competent, serious woman who had worked in the fund's compliance department. She had left shortly before the collapse, claiming she had received a better offer elsewhere. At the time, Karim hadn't thought much of it. People changed jobs all the time, but now, looking back, it seemed suspicious. Do you know where she works? Karim asked. Celia nodded. At the New Life Clinic, near Park Avenue. She mentioned it once. Said it wasn't what she studied for, but at least it had good health insurance for her son. Rick closed his laptop. So that's it. We have technical evidence. We have Francis's accounting notes, and now we need an inside witness. If Marcia really knew something and agrees to talk, we'll have a case. But why would she talk? Laura asked. If she's been quiet all this time, why would she change her mind now? Because now she's not alone, Karim answered. 3 years ago I was public enemy number 1. No one would have believed her if she spoke up for me. But now we have proof. We have data. We have a story that makes sense. And sometimes when people see they're not alone, They find courage they didn't know they had. The next day, Karim went to the New Life Clinic. It was a simple but well-kept place, with white walls and the smell of disinfectant. He asked for Marcia Costello at the reception, and after a few minutes, a woman in her 40s appeared. She was thinner than Karim, remembered with her hair in a tight bun and tired eyes. When she saw him, she froze. The blood drained from her face. "Karim," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," Karim said gently, "about Habibi Capital, about what you saw before you left." Marcia looked around nervously. "I can't talk about this, not here, not now." "Then tell me where and when," Karim insisted. "Please, Marcia. I know you know something. I know you were afraid to speak up. But now I have proof. Proof that the fund was sabotaged, proof that Maurice siphoned off hundreds of millions. And I need you to confirm what you saw." Marcia closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there were tears there. "You don't understand. He threatened me. He said if I said anything, he would destroy my life. He said he would make me lose my son. I couldn't risk it." Karim took a step closer. "I understand. I understand being afraid. I understand wanting to protect the one you love. But Marcia, how many other people will suffer if we don't stop him? How many more families will be destroyed? How many other mothers will die trying to prove the truth?" Marcia looked at him with desperation in her eyes. "You're asking me to risk everything. My job, my safety, my son's safety." "I'm asking you to do what's right," Karim replied, "and I'm promising you that you won't be alone. We will protect you. We will make sure you and your son are safe, but we need your help." Marcia was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded slowly. "All right, I'll talk to you. But not here. Tomorrow night, in Central Park. I'll tell you everything there. And God help me if I'm making the biggest mistake of my life." Central Park was crowded that Saturday night. Families strolled with children, couples walked hand in hand, young people gathered in groups near the lake. Karim was sitting on a bench near the Bethesda terrace, with Laura by his side. Rick had stayed at the diner with Celia, monitoring the news and keeping the files safe. The night was cool, with a light breeze that carried the smell of cut grass and water. Marcia arrived promptly at 8. She wore a simple hooded coat, sunglasses even though it was already dark, clearly trying not to be recognized. She sat on the bench across from Karim, keeping a safe distance, as if physical proximity could make her more of an accomplice than she was about to become. "You brought the child," Marcia said, looking at Laura with a mixture of surprise and discomfort. "Laura wanted to come," Karim replied. "She has as much right to hear this as I do. It was her mother who started this investigation. It was she who brought me the first pieces of proof." Marcia studied Laura for a moment. The girl stared back, unblinking, with that seriousness that frightened adults. "How old are you?" Marcia asked. 8, Laura replied. "My mother was 32 when she died because of what happened at the fund. Her name was Frances Costello. Did you work with her?" Marcia shook her head. "Not directly, but I saw her name on reports. She was trying to question some transactions, ask for clarifications. No one paid attention. They said she was being hysterical, that she didn't understand how the market worked." "She understood perfectly," Laura said coldly. "She just didn't understand how dishonest people work." Marcia took a deep breath. "You want me to tell you what I saw. All right, I will. But first you need to understand something. I'm not a hero. I'm a coward who stayed quiet when I should have spoken up, who let hundreds of people suffer because I was afraid of losing what I had. So don't expect me to feel good about this." "No one is expecting that," Karim said gently. "We just need the truth." Marcia began to speak, and the story that came out of her mouth was worse than Karim had imagined. She told how Maurice had approached her about 6 months before the collapse with a proposal. He said he was going to make some adjustments to the fund, some high-risk operations that could multiply the gains but were technically on the edge of legality. He offered her a generous bonus to adjust some reports, omit certain information, and approve operations without asking too many questions. Marcia had refused at first, but Maurice was persuasive. He showed her documents that, according to him, proved Karim was aware of everything, that Karim had authorized those operations. He said they were just protecting the fund from unnecessary bureaucracy, from rules that stifled the market. And when Marcia continued to hesitate, Maurice changed tactics. He started making veiled threats. He mentioned her son, who at the time was 5 and had serious respiratory problems. He commented on how terrible it would be if she lost her job, and with it, the health insurance that covered the boy's treatments. "I know it's no excuse," Marcia said, her voice choked with emotion. "I know I should have reported it, should have gone to the authorities. But when you have a sick child, when you watch him struggling to breathe in the middle of the night, you make choices. You never thought you would. I signed what Maurice asked. I approved operations I knew were questionable. I turned a blind eye to irregularities. And when I realized it was too late, when I saw the fund was collapsing, I resigned and ran away like a coward." She began to cry. Not delicate tears. It was a desperate sob, built up from 3 years of guilt and shame. Laura, who had spent the last few minutes with a closed expression, stood up and went to Marcia. She placed her small hand on her shoulder. Marcia looked at the girl, surprised by the gesture. "My mother was afraid too," Laura said softly. She also hesitated, also thought about letting it go. But in the end, she chose to do what was right. And you're choosing that now. There's still time to make a difference. Marcia held Laura's hand as if clinging to a life raft in the middle of a stormy sea. "I kept copies," she said, "of everything. Emails Maurice sent, altered memos, reports with changed numbers, documents I signed in blank that were later filled with fake operations. I kept everything in a physical file hidden in my house. I knew I might need it one day. I knew one day it might be the only thing between me and an accusation of complicity." Karim felt a wave of relief. "This is more than I hoped for. This, along with the technical data Rick recovered and the accounting analysis Francis did, is enough to build a solid case." "But what are you going to do with all this?" Marcia asked. "Take it to the police? To the U.S. Attorney's Office? Do you know how much power Maurice has now? How many contacts he has in high places? It'll look like we're the villains. He'll paint you as an incompetent manager trying to redeem himself. He'll say I'm a resentful ex-employee. He'll destroy every one of us." "That's why we can't do this in secret," Karim said. "We can't take it to the authorities and hope they do the right thing. We need to make it all public. We need to make it impossible to cover up." "How?" Marcia asked. Karim looked at Laura. "We need a lawyer. Someone who specializes in financial fraud. Someone who isn't afraid to take on powerful people." Laura nodded. "I know. Someone," she said. "Dr. Helen Andrews. My mother consulted her a few times, trying to see if what she had discovered was enough for a lawsuit. Dr. Andrews said she needed more proof, but if she could get it, she'd take the case. Even knowing it would be difficult, even knowing it would be against powerful people." Marcia looked at them as if they were crazy. "You're talking about going to war with one of the richest men on Wall Street. He'll hire the best lawyers. He'll use every resource possible to crush you." "Yes," Karim said simply. "But for the first time in 3 years, I'm not alone. And this time I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for all the people who lost everything. For Camilla, for Francis, for Laura, for everyone who was destroyed while Maurice built an empire on ruins." Marcia was silent for a long moment. Then she took a deep breath and nodded. "All right. I'll hand over the documents. I'll testify. I'll do whatever it takes. But you have to promise me one thing. If this goes wrong, if Maurice manages to turn this around, you protect my son. Promise." Karim extended his hand. "I promise." Marcia shook his hand, and Laura placed her small hand on top of theirs, sealing the pact. The 3 of them stood there for a moment in silence as the park continued to bustle around them. 3 broken people, united by a story of betrayal and loss, determined to face the impossible. In the following days, things moved quickly. Marcia brought the files with the documents she had kept. There were dozens of pages, each more incriminating than the last. Rick organized the technical data in a way that was understandable even to laypeople. Karim put together a detailed timeline, cross-referencing all the information, showing how everything fit together. And then they went to see Dr. Helen Andrews. Her office was in a commercial building in the Itaim Bibi equivalent, let's say the financial district, not luxurious, but with a professional sobriety. Helen was a woman in her 50s, with short-cropped grey hair and piercing eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses. She had a reputation in the market for being tough, for not taking easy cases, for preferring to fight difficult causes against powerful adversaries. When she saw who was in her waiting room, Karim Habibi, an 8-year-old child, and a nervous woman carrying files, Helen frowned. But she received them. And when they began to present the evidence, when she started to see the numbers, the technical records, the emails, the altered documents, her expression changed from skepticism to genuine interest. She spent hours reviewing everything, asking questions, testing the story from every angle, and in the end, she leaned back in her chair and looked at them with respect. "This is quite a case," she said. "We have solid evidence, witnesses willing to talk, a narrative that makes sense. But you need to understand one thing. Maurice Taylor won't. Let this go quietly. He will fight with everything he has. He will try to discredit each of you. He will use his money, his contacts, his influence to make this disappear." "We know," Karim said, "but we're going to fight anyway." Helen smiled for the first time. It was the smile of a warrior recognizing other warriors. "Then let's do this right. We'll prepare a press conference. We'll call journalists. We'll make everything public at once. We'll put everything on the table before Maurice has a chance to defend himself behind the scenes. It's risky, but it's the only way to ensure this isn't swept under the rug." "When?" Rick asked. 2 weeks from now," Helen replied. "I need to prepare the documents, review everything, make sure our story is solid, and you need to prepare yourselves mentally. This is going to change your lives. For better or for worse, I don't know yet." They agreed. 2 weeks, 14 days to prepare for the moment that would change everything. Karim returned to the diner that night, feeling a mixture of hope and terror. Laura noticed. "You're scared," she said when they were in the back room, ready for bed. "I am," Karim admitted. "Very scared. Scared it won't work. Scared no one will believe us. Scared that Maurice is smarter and will manage to destroy us before we can expose him." Laura sat on the edge of the bed and looked at him. "You know what my mum used to say when I was scared?" "What?" "That being scared is normal. That everyone gets scared. The difference between brave people and cowards isn't that brave people don't feel fear. It's that they do what needs to be done, even when they're scared." Karim felt his eyes well up. "Your mother was wise." "She was," Laura agreed, "and she would be proud of what we're doing. I know she would." Karim sat beside Laura on the bed. For the first time since Camilla died, he didn't feel completely alone. There was this strange, brilliant girl who had appeared in his life like a hurricane, bringing with her the possibility of redemption. There was Celia, with her huge heart and quiet generosity. There was Rick, trying to make up for the mistake of not believing his sister. There was Marcia, facing her own demons, and there was Helen, an experienced warrior willing to fight alongside them. "Thank you," Karim said to Laura, "for not giving up on me, for believing I was worth saving." "You saved yourself," Laura replied. "I just showed you the way." But then, 3 days before the scheduled press conference, everything changed. Karim was helping Celia close the diner when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered hesitantly. "Karim Habibi." The voice on the other end was familiar. He hadn't heard it in 3 years, but he recognized it immediately. Maurice. Karim felt his blood run cold. "How did you get my number?" Maurice laughed, a cold, humorless laugh. "I've always known where you were, always known what you were doing. Did you really think I wouldn't have eyes and ears everywhere?" "What do you want?" Karim asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I want you to stop this nonsense," Maurice said. "I know you're gathering documents, talking to people, preparing something, and I'm going to give you some friendly advice. Don't do it. Don't try to face me. You have no idea what I'm capable of." "I have proof," Karim said. "Proof that you sabotaged the fund, that you siphoned off hundreds of millions, that you used me as a scapegoat." Maurice laughed again. "Proof? You think proof matters? I have money. I have lawyers. I have contacts in all the right places. I can make your proof disappear. I can make you disappear. And more importantly, I can make that annoying little kid living with you disappear too." Karim's heart stopped. You dare not touch her." "It's not a threat," Maurice said calmly. "It's just a fact. You have 24 hours to give me every document you have, every file, every copy, and then you will disappear from my life, forever. If you do that, I'll leave you and the girl alone. If you don't, well, accidents happen, especially to kids living on the streets." The call ended. Karim stood there holding the phone, trembling. Celia, who had overheard part of the conversation, placed a hand on his shoulder. "He threatened Laura," Karim said, his voice choked. "He knows where we are. He knows she's with me. He threatened to hurt her if I don't back down." Celia squeezed his shoulder. "Then we protect her, but we don't back down, because if we back down now, he wins, and how many other children like Laura will suffer in the future." Karim looked at the door of the small room where Laura was sleeping. How could he put a child at risk? How could he choose between justice and her safety? But at the same time, how could he give up now when they finally had a real chance to expose Maurice? He called Helen that same night. He told her about the threat. He expected her to tell him to back down, to prioritize safety. But Helen surprised him. "This only proves we're on the right track," she said. "Desperate. People make desperate threats. Maurice is scared. And I'll arrange for protection. I know reliable security. I'll put someone watching the diner, watching you. We won't let anything happen to Laura." In the following days, a former police officer named Carl began to stand guard at the diner. He was a serious man of few words, but competent. Karim felt a little safer, but the fear still didn't leave him. Every time Laura left the room, every time she went to the kitchen or talked to customers, he kept a paranoid watch, expecting something terrible to happen. Laura noticed, of course. She was too smart not to. One night she went to Karim and said directly, "You're thinking of giving up because of me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Karim didn't try to deny it. "He threatened you, Laura. He said he could hurt you. How can I go on with this knowing I'm putting you in danger?" Laura sat beside him. "And if you give up, will Maurice leave me alone? Will he stop watching? Or will he continue to see me as a threat, as someone who knows too much?" She shook her head. "There's no going back. The only way is forward. Expose him. Make everything public. Because as long as he has power, as long as he can operate in the shadows, none of us are safe." Karim knew she was right, but that didn't make the decision any easier. "I promised your mother, even without having met her, that I would protect you," he said. "How can I do that, and at the same time put you in the line of fire?" "You protect me by fighting," Laura replied with that frightening maturity. "Not by giving up. My mother didn't give up. And look what happened to her. Sometimes giving up is more dangerous than fighting." On the morning of the press conference, Karim woke with a knot in his stomach. They had booked a small event room in a hotel downtown. Helen had invited journalists from various outlets. There were confirmed RSVPs from CNN, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and online news portals. It would be impossible to cover up. Karim, Laura, Rick, and Marcia met an hour before the event to review everything one last time. Helen was there too, impeccable in her dark suit, radiating professional confidence. Carl, the security guard, stood at the door, alert to any strange movements. "Are you ready?" Helen asked. They all nodded, though none of them looked truly ready. How do you prepare for something like this? How do you prepare to expose your life, your mistakes, your pain in front of the whole country? "Remember," Helen said, "we're going to tell the truth. We're going to show the evidence. We will not be intimidated by tough questions. And we will make it clear that this is not about revenge. It's about justice. It's about preventing the same thing from happening to other people." When the doors opened and they entered the room, Karim saw it was packed. More journalists than Helen had expected. Cameras, microphones, flashes. The buzz died down as they took the stage. Karim in the center, Laura by his side. Marcia, Rick, and Helen completing the group. Helen spoke first, setting the context for what was about to be revealed. Then Karim took the microphone. For the first time in 3 years, he told his side of the story. Not with anger, not with excuses, but with the raw truth. He talked about how he had trusted Maurice, how he had been betrayed, how he had lost everything. Marcia confirmed the irregularities, the forged documents, the threats. Rick explained the technical data, the logs that proved the sabotage, and then it was Laura's turn. When she approached the microphone, she had to stand on a small stool to reach it. The image of that small, serious child looking into the cameras completely silenced the room. "My name is Laura," she began. "I'm 8 years old. My mother's name was Frances Costello. She invested everything she had in the Habibi Capital Fund because she believed Mr. Habibi was honest. When the fund collapsed, we lost everything. My mother could have been angry, she could have given up, but she didn't. She investigated. She found that the numbers didn't add up. She found that someone had tampered with the system. She found that the real culprit wasn't Mr. Habibi. And then she died." Laura's voice was steady, but there was a deep emotion behind it. Many journalists had tears in their eyes. Some took pictures. The cameras captured every word. "My mother couldn't be here to tell her story," Laura continued, "so I'll tell it for her. Numbers don't lie. And these numbers show that Maurice Taylor stole hundreds of millions of dollars. He destroyed families. He made good people feel guilty for things they didn't do, and he thought he would get away with it forever. But he won't. Because the truth always finds a way out, even if it takes a long time, even if it takes a barefoot child in the rain to bring it to light." The room erupted with questions. Journalists shouted to be heard. Cameras clicked non-stop. Helen had to call for order several times. They spent 2 hours answering questions, showing documents, explaining everything in minute detail. When they finally left the hotel, exhausted, they knew they had changed everything. The story was already spreading online. The first outlets were already publishing articles, and somewhere in the city, probably surrounded by expensive lawyers and nervous advisors, Maurice Taylor was realizing that his perfect world was about to come crashing down. The news exploded like a bomb on Wall Street. Within 48 hours, the story was in every newspaper, on every news broadcast, on every social media platform. The image of Laura, that 8-year-old girl explaining with chilling clarity how her mother had uncovered the fraud, went viral. People who had never heard of the Habibi Capital case now knew every detail. The headlines varied, but the sentiment was unanimous. Karim Habibi had been wronged, and Maurice Taylor was the real villain. The day after the press conference, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, announced the opening of a formal investigation. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York also issued a statement, saying they were analyzing the evidence presented. Investors who had lost everything in the Habibi Capital collapse began to mobilize, hiring lawyers, preparing class action lawsuits. The pressure was immense. Maurice Taylor, meanwhile, was in Nassau, Bahamas. He had traveled there a week before the press conference, claiming business commitments, but in reality, anticipating what was to come. His first move was to hire a team of very expensive lawyers and issue a statement categorically denying all allegations. He claimed to be the victim of a conspiracy driven by a resentful ex-partner, a former employee with personal problems, and a manipulated child. The statement was poorly received. Publicly attacking an orphan girl was not a good public relations strategy. For weeks, Maurice remained in Nassau, sheltered in a 5-star resort, surrounded by lawyers who advised him never to set foot in the United States again. The Bahamas had no extradition treaty with the U.S. for his alleged crimes. He could stay there indefinitely, living comfortably on the money he had siphoned off. His companies in the U.S. were frozen, his assets blocked, but he had fortunes hidden in offshore accounts that no one could reach. Karim followed everything with a mixture of satisfaction and frustration. The truth had been exposed, his name was being cleared, but the villain was still free. Sitting in Celia's diner one night, watching the news on the old TV in the corner, he expressed his dismay. "He's going to stay there forever," Karim said. "He'll live in a tropical paradise while the families he destroyed continue to suffer here." Laura was sitting next to him, eating a plate of pasta Celia had made. She didn't seem worried. "He'll come back," she said with conviction. Karim looked at her. "Why do you think so?" "Because people like him can't stay hidden forever," Laura replied. "He has an ego. He has pride. He won't stand being seen as a coward. He'll want to clear his name. He'll think he can control the narrative, and he'll make a mistake." Karim wanted to believe it, but it seemed like too much to hope for. Until 2 weeks later, exactly what Laura had predicted happened. Maurice Taylor announced he was returning to the United States. In a bombshell interview with an international magazine, he said he was innocent and would return to prove it in court. He said he was not afraid of Karim Habibi or his false allegations, that he had faith in the American justice system. Helen called Karim as soon as the news broke. "He's too arrogant for his own good," she said. "He thinks he can control the process, that his lawyers will be able to turn everything around. But he's making the biggest mistake of his life. As soon as he sets foot in the US, we'll have him arrested on a pre-trial warrant." And that's exactly what happened. When Maurice landed at JFK Airport on a private jet, surrounded by lawyers and security, he was met by TV cameras, journalists, and most importantly, an arrest warrant. The lawyers tried to protest, argued about illegalities, but it was no use. Maurice was handcuffed right there in front of the cameras and taken to a police station. The image of him being arrested became a global headline. The sophisticated ex-millionaire, always so confident and powerful, now handcuffed and pale. Karim watched the scene on the diner's TV and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was relief. A sense that finally, things were moving in the right direction. Laura held his hand. "I told you so," she said with a small smile. The trial was set to begin 6 months later. In those months, Karim's life changed drastically. He started receiving apologies from ex-clients who had cursed him, from journalists who had written defamatory articles, from institutions that had revoked his license. Some were sincere. Others were clearly opportunistic, now that he was seen as a hero instead of a villain. His license to operate in the financial market was restored. He received job offers from several management firms, generous offers, but he turned them all down. He didn't want to go back to that world, not anymore. Something had changed in him. The months living in the cramped room at the diner, working in the kitchen, taking care of Laura, had transformed his priorities. With Helen's help, he began working on something different. A foundation for gifted, low-income children. Children like Laura, who had exceptional talents but no opportunities. The foundation would be named after Frances Costello, in honor of the woman who had sacrificed everything to expose the truth. Karim used some of the money he managed to recover from his frozen assets to fund the first projects. As for Laura, she continued to live at the diner with Karim and Celia. The idea of sending her back to a group home was unthinkable. Karim had filed for temporary guardianship, and after their story became public, the authorities quickly approved it. Rick, Laura's uncle, fully supported the decision. He visited regularly, but recognized that Karim had become the father figure Laura needed. The trial finally began on a cold August morning. The New York County Supreme Court was packed. Journalists, onlookers, victims of the fund's collapse, everyone wanted to be there. The process would be long, experts said. It could last over a year, but everyone knew it would be the most important financial trial of the decade. Maurice entered the courtroom impeccably dressed, surrounded by a team of 5 expensive lawyers. He looked confident, almost arrogant. He waved to the cameras as if he were a celebrity and not a defendant accused of massive fraud. His lawyers had prepared a complex defense full of technical terms and sophisticated legal arguments. On the other side, Karim, Laura, Marcia, and Rick sat together in the witness section. Helen led the prosecution, supported by a team of prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office. The evidence was presented meticulously, the server logs showing the algorithm changes, Frances's accounting notes demonstrating the discrepancies, the emails and documents Marcia had kept, all building a solid and undeniable case. The defense tried to discredit each witness. They said Karim was just an incompetent manager trying to redeem himself, that Rick was an IT technician with limited knowledge who didn't really understand what the data meant, that Marcia was a resentful ex-employee with financial problems. When it was Laura's turn to testify, Maurice's lawyers were particularly aggressive. They tried to argue that she was just a child, easily manipulated, who was repeating what adults had put in her head. Laura took the witness stand wearing a simple dress Celia had bought for her. Her hair was in a ponytail, and she wore glasses that Karim had gotten for her after discovering she had trouble seeing from a distance. She didn't seem intimidated by the crowded room, the hostile lawyers, the cameras. The defense lawyer began with seemingly simple questions: name, age, where she lived. Then he became more aggressive. He insinuated that she lacked the capacity to understand complex financial concepts, that she had been coerced into saying specific things, that she was being used by unscrupulous adults. Laura waited patiently for him to finish. Then, with unnerving calm, she began to answer. She explained risk analysis concepts with a clarity that impressed even the judge. She quoted numbers from memory. She demonstrated a deep understanding not only of finance, but of the mathematics behind it. And when the lawyer tried to suggest again that she had been manipulated, Laura looked directly at him and said something that cut through the air in the room. "My mother died because she discovered the truth," she said. "Not because she was manipulated, not because she was stupid or paranoid, because she was too good with numbers to ignore the obvious. And you're here, trying to make me look like a manipulated idiot child, because you know that if people take me seriously, if they trust what I'm saying, your client will spend the rest of his life in prison. But the difference between me and the adults in this room is that I have nothing to gain by lying. I have no career to protect, no money at stake. I just want my mother to rest in peace, knowing that the truth has prevailed." The silence that followed was absolute. Several people in the audience were openly crying. The judge cleared his throat, visibly moved, and even Maurice's lawyers seemed to retreat, realizing they had made a grave tactical error in underestimating this child. The trial dragged on for a total of 18 months. There were expert testimonies, counter-testimonies, witnesses for the prosecution and defense, appeals, legal maneuvers. Maurice tried everything. He offered plea bargains. He tried to intimidate witnesses. His lawyers attacked every aspect of the case. But the evidence was too solid, the numbers didn't lie. And the human narrative brought to life by Laura had touched not only the jury, but the entire country. When the sentence was finally read on a rainy September morning, the verdict was unanimous: guilty. Maurice Taylor was sentenced to 32 years in prison for fraud, embezzlement, racketeering, and a long list of other crimes. His assets were confiscated to reimburse the victims. His companies were dismantled. His empire, built on lies and blood, completely collapsed. Karim was in the room when the sentence was read. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel revenge. He just felt a deep exhaustion and immense relief. It was over. Finally over. He looked at Laura, who was sitting beside him, and saw tears streaming down her face. They were the first tears he had seen her shed since they met. He pulled her into a hug, and she clung to him, sobbing, releasing years of pain, anger, and fear. In the months that followed, life began to reorganize. Karim was officially cleared of all charges. He received a formal apology from the SEC. Newspapers that had destroyed him published retractions. He was invited to give lectures, to speak about his experience, about how he had survived the fall and found redemption. But what Karim wanted to do most was something much more personal and important. He wanted to officially adopt Laura, not as a gesture of charity, not out of pity, but because at some point during those difficult months, she had become the most important thing in his life. It was as if Camilla had sent Laura to him as a final gift, a last chance to be happy. Rick, when Karim talked to him about the idea, was emotional. "Francis would have loved this," he said with tears in his eyes. "She always wanted Laura to have a family, someone to take care of her, to protect her, to recognize how special she is. And you've done all that and more. Please take care of my niece. I'll always be around, always be part of her life, but I know you can give her what I can't. A real home." The adoption process took another 6 months. There were interviews, psychological evaluations, home visits. Laura was interviewed several times, asked if this was what she really wanted. Her answer was always the same: yes. Karim was her family. He was the person who had stood by her when she needed it most. He was the man her mother had died trying to protect and who now protected her. Finally, on a spring afternoon, 3 years after that rainy night when Laura had walked into the Star of the East diner soaked and barefoot, she and Karim left the courthouse with the approved adoption papers. Laura Rosa Habibi. That was her name now. She had chosen to keep Rosa, her mother's surname, as her middle name, and she had embraced Habibi as her last name, sealing the bond that had existed for a long time. Celia organized a small party at the diner to celebrate. Rick was there, happy and proud. Helen, too, who had become not just a lawyer but a true friend. Marcia came with her son, who was now healthy and full of energy. Some of the diner's regulars, who had followed the whole journey, also attended. It was a simple celebration, without luxury, but full of love and meaning. Karim hadn't become a millionaire again. He hadn't recovered the empire he once had, but he had built something better. The Francis Costello Foundation was up and running, helping dozens of brilliant children get access to quality education. Celia's diner had become a meeting point for people who needed a second chance. And he had a daughter, a family, a reason to wake up every morning. Laura continued to be that extraordinary child, but now she could also just be a child. She went back to school, a good private school that Karim could afford with the consulting work he did occasionally. She made friends. She learned to laugh more, to worry less about adult things. But she never forgot her mother. She kept Francis's notebook in a special box in her room, like a sacred relic. And every now and then, when the longing became too much, she would open it and review the numbers, the notes, the proof that had changed everything. 5 years after the trial, when Laura was 13 and becoming an intelligent and assertive teenager, Karim was invited to give a lecture at New York University. The topic was ethics in the financial market, how to rebuild a career after a fall, and redemption. The auditorium was packed. Economics students, professors, market professionals, everyone wanted to hear the story of the man who had been demonized and then redeemed. Karim took the stage with a few white hairs starting to appear at his temples. He wasn't nervous. He had told that story so many times that it no longer hurt as much. He began by talking about his early days in the market, about the excitement of building Habibi Capital, about the pride of watching the fund grow. Then he spoke about the collapse, about the confusion, the despair, the guilt that consumed him, about losing Camilla, about hitting rock bottom. And then he spoke about the night everything changed, about a barefoot girl who walked into a diner in the rain, about an old notebook full of numbers that told the truth, about how that child had given him back not just his honor, but also his will to live. In the audience, Laura was sitting in the front row. She was no longer that small, frightening girl. She was a beautiful, confident teenager, wearing the uniform of the private school she attended. Her green eyes shone with pride as she watched her father tell their story. "I lost everything," Karim told the audience. "Money, status, respect, my wife. I reached a point where I saw no reason to go on. And then that child showed me that when you're at the bottom, there's only one way to go up. She taught me that being 8 years old and believing in justice is more powerful than having millions and no conscience. She taught me that the truth always finds a way out, even if it takes a storm, a wet notebook, and a whole lot of courage." He paused. He looked directly at Laura. "Today, she is my daughter, not by blood but by choice, by love, for everything we went through together. And if anyone asks me what my greatest achievement in life was, I won't talk about the billion-dollar fund I managed. I'll talk about the day that barefoot girl decided I was worth saving. Because that was the day I learned that redemption doesn't come from getting back what you lost. It comes from finding something new, something better, something that truly matters." The audience erupted in applause. Laura was crying but smiling too. After the lecture, she went up to the stage and hugged Karim. He held her tight, this girl who had become a teenager, who would soon be a woman, but who would always be his daughter, his savior, his reason to believe that even from the worst storm, something beautiful can be born. As they left the auditorium hand in hand, Laura held the strap of her backpack with her other hand, where she carried her mother's notebook. She didn't always bring it, but that day it felt right. It was a reminder of where they had started, how much they had fought, how much they had won. And as they walked across the university campus under the blue New York sky, father and daughter, united not by chance but by an unlikely journey of pain and redemption, they both knew their story wasn't about a fund that collapsed or a villain who was jailed. It was about two broken people who found each other at the right moment and decided that giving up was not an option. It was about how numbers don't lie, but more importantly, about how love and truth are the most powerful forces in the world, even when all seems lost, especially when all seems lost. Maurice Taylor was still in prison, serving his sentence, and would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. But Karim no longer thought about him. He didn't waste energy on anger or resentment. He had better things to worry about. He had a daughter to raise, a foundation to run, people to help. He had a life worth living. And Laura, who had started that journey as a lonely orphan, now had a father, an uncle who loved her, Celia as a grandmother of the heart, friends, a future. She still carried the pain of losing her mother, she always would, but she learned that pain and happiness can coexist, that you can honor those you've lost by living well, by fighting for justice, by making a difference. Years later, when Laura graduated with honors in economics, she dedicated her degree to the memory of Frances Costello, the woman who was too good with numbers to ignore the truth, the woman who had died alone but had left a legacy of courage and integrity, the woman whose old wet notebook had changed everything. And as Karim watched his daughter walk across the stage to receive her diploma, he felt Camilla there too. He knew she would be proud of him for finding the strength to go on, proud of Laura for becoming an extraordinary woman, proud of them both for turning tragedy into triumph, because in the end, their story wasn't about a young manager who was betrayed and then redeemed. It wasn't about an orphan girl who exposed a criminal. It was about two lost souls who found each other on a stormy night and decided that the truth was worth fighting for. And in the process, they saved each other, not just from external destruction, but from internal destruction, from despair, from guilt, from loneliness. And that, more than any court sentence or newspaper headline, was their greatest victory. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Karim and Laura has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of redemption, of a brave girl who changed the destiny of a broken man, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most in this story. Was it Laura's courage? Karim's transformation? The lesson that truth always prevails? Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing how even from the worst storms, hope can be born. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will touch your soul.